Let's Renovate a Bathroom, a Build original series brought to you by Schluter Systems.
Hey everyone, I'm Zach Detmore and welcome to another episode of Let's Renovate a Bathroom. Today we're talking about MEPs, mechanical, electric, and plumbing. Plumbing's the most important part of the bathroom, really. That's what you think about when you're remodeling a bathroom. And today's sponsor is Odie. So we're gonna show you all the essential things you need to plumb your own bathroom and maybe to think about if you wanna hire a plumber. So let's get into it today on The Build Show. So let's talk about plumbing first, the most important part of a bathroom, and that's how water is delivered to the bathroom and then taken away. So the way the water gets to the bathroom is through hot and cold water supply lines. There's typically two types of these. There are copper, which if you have an old house is probably what you have, but there's also brass. If you come across a brass plumbing line, you definitely want to get rid of that right away. If you find copper, it might be fine to reuse that. Today we're going to actually use PEX for a couple reasons. It's freeze protection. It tends to not burst when frozen, and old houses can be drafty. It's also a little bit easier to run, and it's a little bit more affordable because copper is a pretty expensive product. Certain municipalities in the US are going to require that you use copper, so you may see some people using copper because they have no other option. That's especially common in really urban environments and cities. So basically, the hot water is coming from your water heater. The cold water is coming from your main water supply, and it's delivered through these pipes, and they're typically 1/2 inch. If you have a very large water need, then you may want to step it up to 3/4 of an inch. In general, these types of decisions are made by plumbing professionals. If you're DIYing your bathroom, you're going to have to do a tremendous amount of research into plumbing code so that you can pass your building municipal inspections, because just because you're doing the job yourself doesn't mean it doesn't need to meet the International Building Code. So on this job, I went ahead and hired a plumber. That's what I typically recommend, and that's what I do for all of my projects. But I'm still going to talk through some of the basics, because even if you are a DIYer or a general contractor, it's good to understand a little bit about plumbing so you can make sure you're guiding yourself and your clients correctly. So that's how water is brought to your bathrooms. Let's talk about how it's removed from your bathroom. So in this case, we have 4 plumbing fixtures. We have the tub, the shower, the toilet, and the lavatory, or the sink, right? And each one of those has a designated drain and a designated vent. If it's a certain distance from the stack, it needs to be vented, and basically it needs to be vented because you don't want your plumbing fixtures gurgling. So if you were to pour water in the top of this, there would be air trying to escape, and if there was no venting, meaning air being added into the top of the pipe, you would get gurgling and bubbling, which can be very annoying, and it can cause drains to be slow to drain. So that's why it's important to vent. And a lot of DIYers who try to remodel bathrooms themselves, they get the pitch of the drain right, everything drains out to the street, but they don't get venting correct, because that's something that's easily overlooked by a novice. So make sure, if you're unclear about that, hire a licensed plumber to vent your bathroom properly. Now, there are 2 types of pipe that are most common. I would say a plastic variety and a metal variety. In this case, in my area, PVC is most common, and if you cross the Hudson River and go into the city, it's required that you use cast iron. So in general, cast iron is going to be more durable, right? You're not going to put nails through it, and it's also going to be quieter when you're pushing water through it or flushing a toilet. You're not going to hear it as much. So it's certainly more expensive, but it's arguably better in some cases. But I would say 99% of bathrooms in this country are probably using some sort of plastic pipe, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the best thing about this, if you're trying to DIY it, is the ease of assembly. One thing that a lot of people don't think about when remodeling a bathroom is replacing their stack. Now, the stack refers to this vertical piece that's going to run through the roof of the house and vent the whole house. Typically, people will overlook that, and they'll tie their new plumbing just into the stack, and they won't think about, in a house that's of this age, that stack could be very old. Here's the one we removed here, and you can see, well, for a vertical run, it's still pretty thick, it's durable, but one of the main problems with these is their ability to get toilet paper hung up. You'll see that's not a smooth internal diameter like this is. So toilet paper and wipes are going to slide much easier down a new PVC pipe than they will down a corroded cast iron pipe. And this can lead to a lot of blockages. So we went ahead and just replaced this whole thing down to the street. It's good to think about whether your stack is at the end of its life, because making a repair later when you've got this all tiled and finished is very expensive. Now is the time to do it, so I encourage people whenever they're remodeling their bathroom to replace as much of the infrastructure as they can afford if it's at the end of its lifespan. If you have a house built in the 80s and you have a PVC stack, it's perfectly fine to keep it. I'm sure it's in great shape and will last many, many, many more years. If you want to understand the fundamentals of plumbing, first there's some tools and some products you should probably familiarize yourself with. Odie pretty much sells a ton of products and they're pretty much available anywhere, so they're a perfect sponsor for this video because you pretty much can't remodel a bathroom without using some of their products. So I'll give you a brief overview of the ones I keep in my toolkit that I think are essential. And remember, I'm not a plumber, I am just a remodeler, but it's good to have these things when I need them in a pinch. So I think the most common, the one that a lot of people recognize, is Teflon tape. So this is great for putting around threads in a bathroom. A specific place you're going to probably use it is when you have the shower head coming out. You'll put this on the end of the arm that comes out, and it's going to seal the threads between the female adapter that's supplying water to the shower head and the part that comes out. So you'll probably be seeing us use this later when we get to the finished stage of the job. Another really common one is going to be PVC cement. So one of the reasons I believe PVC piping is so prolific is because how easy it is to make a connection. So PVC cement is pretty easy, and I'll show you quickly how to apply that. There's a primer that you would put on the end of the pipe. You'd use that same primer in the pipe. Let that set. Come back. This stuff is a little smelly, so I recommend having a well-ventilated space. I'm standing next to this open window here. Then I'm basically going to put this PVC cement on each side. I do it like a tiny turn, and then I'm just going to hold that for a few seconds. And honestly, that's a extremely durable, long-lasting piece. Obviously, you want to watch some plumbers give you a tutorial on how to use this properly, but that's how simple it is to use the PVC cement to glue two pipes together. Very easy and nice thing to keep. The other thing that's fairly common for bathrooms is going to be plumber's putty. And a spot where this is pretty common to use will be when you're putting the drain in the sink. You'll break off a piece of this and basically roll it out, put it around the drain, and it's going to sort of seal that area between the back of the drain and the bottom of your ceramic sink or whatever sink you have. So this is another incredibly useful product. The next product we're showing is pipe joint compound. Some people call it pipe dope, but where this is going to be used is typically on threaded pipe connections, like the ones we're using for the steam radiator in this job. When you're threading those pipes together, you can seal those joints with a joint compound, and you basically just paint it on the threads and screw it together. All right, let's talk about some of the tools you'll need for plumbing a bathroom. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are just some that I think are a good starting point for a plumbing project. These are ones that go in my plumbing box. So the first one is channel locks. I would suggest having a couple different sizes. I find the large ones like this to be useful, but most of the time I'll be using a standard one. A pipe wrench, basically this allows you to grab onto a threaded pipe and turn it, and you don't have to sort of squeeze like you would if you were using channel locks. If you end up using PEX pipe, this would be a crimp tool to crimp the ring on the end of the PEX. If you're using expansion PEX or Uponor PEX like I am here, then that would be an expanding tool. But that's a more expensive tool that a plumber would be using. So if you're a DIY, crimp PEX might be at a more affordable price point and more what's seen in your market. Channel locks are a good tool just to have in your arsenal, as are many assorted wrenches. And then a basin wrench is a good one too. This is sort of a more specialized tool for reaching into hard to reach places, like especially behind the back of the sink, and getting things to loosen up like faucets. Some emery cloth, it's basically like a woven sandpaper. This is going to be for sort of removing and cleaning any debris that's on the end of your copper pipes. Even if you're using PEX, you may need to tie in at one place to copper, which brings me to my next point. When you're tying into copper, unless you're using a push to connect fitting, then you're going to need to solder it on. And that's going to involve using a torch. But I don't recommend using a torch or doing any of that unless you have some sort of heat protecting blanket. This one's basically you can hang it or put it behind whatever you're working on, because one thing that's important to remember, where you're cutting through pipe, you're typically doing that when the water's off. So if you create a fire in your house, you may not have an easy way to fill up a bucket and put out that fire, or you may not have the clear thinking. So buy several of these to make sure there's not a fire. I've worked on many projects that the renovation was started because a plumber was in there making a small repair and ended up setting the house on fire, and I can just guess that they weren't using one of these. Another cool tool is this is called a socket saver. So basically this goes inside the end of a PVC pipe. So if you had you wanted to reuse this fitting, you could cut it flush, put this in, and it would sort of ream out the pipe, and maybe this fitting is buried in a wall where you can't reach it. So that's going to allow you to reuse that fitting. So that can be a useful tool for retrofit applications, and then obviously a copper pipe cutter. So those are just some of the essential tools I think are necessary to make the job a little bit more tackleable, if that's a word. All right. Let's talk about the anatomy of the plumbing fixtures in this bathroom and some things to consider. Let's start with a bathtub, one of the most common bathroom finishes, right? So most bathrooms have a shower over tub, it's called, and it's an alcove tub. We're going to show you sort of how we put those in, but let's start with the sort of basics. So typically an alcove tub is going to have a drain on the right or the left. Typically they're roughly 32 by 60 inches. When you frame this opening, you typically want to be a little bit bigger than 60 because you may not be able to get it in. One thing to remember is you may need to pack the wall out after so that the wallboard travels over the lip of the tub. So don't necessarily think that this is the finished surface of your wall. There's typically what's called a trip lever. So there's a overflow on the tub that goes down through here, and you'll have your drain located somewhere. So in general, if you can, just cutting a larger hole in the floor is going to make it easier to make those connections. If you're in a bathroom that is not having the first floor remodeled at the same time, or you don't have an open ceiling, then you may need to make those connections from the top, which can be slightly more complex, but definitely not impossible. Now, something to think about is where you want your tub spout to be. In general, that spout's going to be about 4 inches above the top of the tub. Something to think about as well is your controls for the tub. So in general, if it's a shower over tub, you're going to have the controls higher, maybe 24 inches above the tub, for example. And that's going to look something like this, a thermostatic control valve. So that would get mounted up here. It's going to send water down to the tub or up to the shower head. But because we're doing a separate shower, we're just going to have 2 handles that control the water. And you can see this hot and cold water has already been brought up to supply for that. There are a couple different types of controls. A lot of times for freestanding tubs, they don't have a thermostatic or scald protection built in to the trim, meaning we have to put thermostatic control to make sure the water doesn't get too hot in that tub somewhere else. A lot of times we'll put it in a vanity. In this case, we're putting it in the closet downstairs. But basically what that is it's a valve that's receiving hot water and cold water, and it's going to mix the two together such that the inlet side of the hot water for the tub supply isn't too hot, because there are code standards that govern how hot water can be, so people who live in houses aren't getting burned. When selecting the overflow, you want to make sure you are matching your finishes if you decide to do so. So if you have a chrome shower valve, you probably want a chrome overfill and drain on your tub. Simple enough. Let's talk about a shower now, right? I've gone ahead and marked out where I want this thermostatic control valve, and this, as you can see, has 3 outlets on it. So you could pick to send water to 3 separate places with this particular unit. And those 3 places are going to be, in this case, we're going to have a handheld, we're going to have a shower head, and then maybe we'll have a rain head in the ceiling. And you'll notice another thing that's interesting is that there's rigid foam insulation in this wall. Why is there insulation here but nowhere else? And the reason I did that is because this is an exterior wall, and in general you don't want plumbing in an exterior wall. However, this is also an exterior wall, and I had to have the shower head coming out of something, and I didn't want to build a solid wall here because I thought that would really compromise how open the shower felt. So we went ahead and insulated these walls, and now we're going to trench out a little trench. So we're going to have water supply coming to the handheld and water supply coming to the shower head. And what that's actually going to do is it's going to help none of that cold air freeze these pipes. Even though technically these pipes are open and they should be able to drain out, we just want to really do a good job of insulating to make sure they don't freeze. So we're going to caulk and seal this in, and you'll see in a later episode when we're closing it up and the plumbing's done how we've made sure to guarantee that the warming from the conditioned space is making sure these pipes don't freeze. In general, if you can avoid it, don't put pipes in exterior walls. But if you have to do it, it's better to put a pipe that is basically disengaged from the water supply. So this is, if this freezes and bursts, it's only going to run out the water that's in the pipe. It's not just going to run and run and run and run when you're on vacation, so it's slightly safer. But basically this is going to just get mounted here, and we're going to bring hot and cold water into it. And then we have a trap below the floor, and we're going to connect our shower system into that trap, and we'll show you how we make that drain connection when we install the shower pan. So let's talk about the anatomy of a toilet. What makes a toilet different than your other plumbing fixtures is it actually has a trap built into it, a P-trap. So your shower, your tub, and your sink, we're actually going to add in a trap. Probably, for example, in the sink, we'll use an OD trap that brings it up to tie in. But here, we actually can just have an elbow going in to the drain because the trap will be in the toilet itself. And what a trap does is it basically creates a little trap of water that's always present in the pipe. And what that does is it keeps sewer gas from escaping. Sometimes I'll get service calls and people will say, it smells really, really bad in my guest shower and I don't know how to get rid of that terrible smell. And I'll say, when was the last time you used it? Oh, I haven't used it in months. That's because the water has evaporated out of the trap. So it's important to just go back if you're not using a trap consistently and fill it back up with water. If you're never using that trap at all, like say it's buried under a laundry machine, there are products you can get to keep that evaporation from happening, or maybe add some sort of fluid to the trap that is less prone to evaporation. The toilet mounts directly on the closet flange. It typically gets screwed down, but different toilets have different sort of modifications. Obviously, there's wall-mounted toilets too, which would have the pipe sitting back here in the wall. But most toilets are going to be a 12-inch rough, meaning this is going to be roughly 12 inches off the wall plus the wall thickness. It's going to be roughly at least 15 inches off the adjacent surfaces because you need a 30-inch clearance for a toilet as a minimum. It's going to have a water supply that's typically to the left of the center of the drain. If you know what you're doing with your walls, you may want to cheat the manufacturer's specifications. For example, if you're doing baseboard here and this is ending right in the middle of the baseboard, you may want to go ahead and just bring that a little bit down or a little bit up so that the escutcheon, which is the ring that surrounds the pipe and is required by code, is sitting all on the baseboard or all on the wall surface. In this case, we're going to tile this wall not up to the ceiling, but pretty close, so I can pretty much put it anywhere because it's one flat, consistent surface. One thing to think about with your toilets is, are you adding a bidet or any sort of electronics to that toilet? It might be worth roughing in an outlet for that if you haven't thought already about that, because it can be expensive to add later. So here we are at a sink or lavatory. A lot of simple components here. Basically you have a drain. The most important thing with the drain is placing it in the right location. You must select your vanity. You must select a vanity that gives you specifications on the drain and the water supply heights. You cannot leave this to a later date and just rough this in at a general location, because it's very likely that it will be wrong, because a lot of people are trying to maximize storage in bathrooms, and what do? They opt for drawers, and the drawers affect where the trap goes. So do yourself a favor, pick that vanity early, and then rough it in exactly where you want. And if you're picking the vanity, you need to pick the floor tile, because if this thickness changes substantially, then it's going to throw off your rough-in. So make all your decisions early before you start roughing in your bathroom with plumbing. So we've got hot and cold water coming to this. We've got our sink drain line, and you can see what's also vented. So you can see if we added water to here, it's going to run down, and then it's going to pull air from outside in to keep the gurgling from happening. So that's the basic anatomy of a lavatory. Okay, it's time to install the mechanical ventilation, which is our bathroom vent fan. So the first thing we want to do is figure out where we want to put the vent fan, which is going to be here. And the next thing is where we want to exhaust it, which will be going out into the soffit and coming down. So what I'm going to do is I took this 4-inch hole saw. A great thing about this hole saw is it's deep enough that it can cut through a lot of material. So let's go ahead and get started with this hole. Okay, that was easy. Now I'm going to mount a 2x4. So to support the vent fan, I'm going to put a 2x4 up in there. It's a bit of a heavy piece of equipment, so it never hurts to have a little extra structure. I'm going to put the support on the side of the fan that is not venting, so there's nothing obstructing my venting side. So I'll screw this in. Now we're going to take the vent fan, pop it up into place, and put a couple screws in it. Okay. You cut that to 48, Kaylin. Okay, so Kaylin cut me this hard pipe. We like to use rigid pipe whenever possible. You may want to insulate this pipe depending on the climate you're in or the insulation you're putting above. But one of the things you'll notice was using rigid pipe, and the reason for that is this is as permanent a piece of infrastructure as any of these other pipes are, in my opinion. A lot of times you'll get the sidewall vent will get damaged and birds will start roosting in it. Maybe they'll bite through a thin flexible vent. So that's why I like using a rigid vent whenever possible. So I'm gonna go ahead and push this through the hole I cut. Oops. I'm gonna point the side that has been crimped, which means it's a smaller diameter, out, because we want any dust to sort of want to travel into the next point. We don't want to create turbulence and allow dust to travel out into this sort of coupling joint. So we're going to put the crimp side away from the fan, and then we'll bring it back and connect the vent to the pipe like that. And we're going to just take some of this foil tape. It's got a backing on it. You can also drive a screw in to secure it, but first we'll do this tape. And what we're trying to do is just keep that moist air that the fan is pulling out from blowing any of that air into the floor assembly that we've got up here between this floor and the attic. So we've treated the seams, and we're going to treat all of the joints as well with this tape. So that's nice and sealed now. Going outside, and that is the ventilation connection. All right, let's talk about electric in a bathroom. The next fun little luxury we have is lights. So let's talk about lights. In general, in a bathroom, you're going to have at least one overhead light. If you're feeling spendy, then you can do, add a light in the shower, right? So in this bathroom, I'm probably going to go with 4 lights. that are relatively small. So typical recessed light in a bathroom is probably 4 inches. I may drop it down to 1.5 in this bathroom because it's small, but what I'm going for is even lighting. So I'm gonna try and have a light here, a light there, so I can see the front of my body if I were showering in here. On the toilet, it would be one over there, and there'd be one as you walk in the door. So just even lighting within the bathroom. I'm gonna zone it as one, so the whole ceiling is gonna be on one zone. The next place you wanna think about lighting is the mirror, right? At a minimum, you're probably gonna want one light above it. One thing I like to think of is sort of like a dressing room, if you think of an old theater with the bulbs around it. To get the best lighting on your face, you're gonna wanna be surrounded by light. But how do you do that in an aesthetically pleasing way? It's probably going to be flanking your mirror with a light on each side. A consideration to have, though, is if you're doing a medicine cabinet, will you smash the light with the mirror if you open it? So you may need to place them far away. Once again, pick things out ahead of time, get them on the job site, and then you can test out in real time where they go. Are you centering the light fixtures on your face, or are you centering them on a shorter person who lives in the house's face or a taller person who lives in the house face? That's important. It's important to think, is someone doing makeup? Is someone shaving? In there, is there highlight situations that are important to you, because that may change the design. But most of our bathrooms are either gonna have one light above or they're gonna have 2 lights flanking. Those lights can be wall mounted, they can be pendants, they can be anything. So a lot of options when it comes to lighting. But you've got overhead and sconces is typically the normal thing, and then you get into accent lighting, like putting them in the niche, that type of detail, which is all up to you. The next essential is power. You will need one receptacle per sink. But there are other receptacles you may want to add. The first one is going to be for a bidet. Adding a receptacle or at least a power location by the toilet can be good for future proofing. We've added receptacles high up for speakers, like if someone wanted to mount a Sonos, we put receptacles inside drawers of vanities using a docking drawer so that they can have hair dryers plugged in and just pull them out. We've put them inside of medicine cabinets, which can be great if you have electric toothbrushes. They're all hidden away. So adding power and thinking about where you want it is essential. Just know that within 6 feet of plumbing, you are going to need a GFCI protected receptacle, ground fault interrupted. And that basically means if you drop an appliance in the sink and it gets wet, it will trip this and it won't cause any sort of arcing or sparking ideally. You can also put a GFI breaker in the panel if you don't want to see this unsightly type of receptacle. That's up to you, and that would depend on your electrician. Once again, just like plumbing, I would recommend hiring an electrician for your job. It can seem simple, but if you screw this up or you don't understand electrical, it just might be very dangerous. And you have to think about your time. For you to learn the code to do things properly, is it going to be quicker for you to learn that, or is it going to be better for you just to pay someone to do it? Because in general, electrician's probably going to charge you somewhere between $200 and $3,000 depending on how much you're doing. But in the big scope of the total bathroom renovation, it's not a huge cost, you know, when you compare it to maybe installing tile or the plumbing work, for example. So electric's something you may want to do yourself. The final necessary appliance is definitely going to be the vent fan. So even if you have a window, having a vent fan that's going to remove the steam from the shower, most importantly, and also the smells from the toilet, it's good to have this. I like to basically put this in a location that's just outside of the shower. You don't want it in the shower, but you want it just outside the shower so it can capture as much of that steam as possible. The closer it is, the more effective it will be. Remember that these things are basically taking conditioned air you're paying to condition and blowing it outside. So you don't want this to be so powerful that you're wasting a lot of money in the winter just dumping conditioned air outdoors. So typically I go like 80 to 110 CFM. But it's, you know, sort of up to you how you want to play with that. Try and make the run for the ductwork as short as possible to an exterior wall, because the shorter it is, the more efficient this will be. If you put a bunch of elbows and you put a 110 CFM fan in, you might only be getting 90 CFM of performance because it's being restricted. When installing the vent fan, and back to that conditioned airspace, I always like to install a countdown timer on these appliances, meaning basically you can hit a button that says 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is. You get out of the shower, you hit it on, it will pull the steam from the room, but it'll turn off again. You don't really want to hit the fan on, accidentally forget to turn it off because these are relatively quiet, and then leave for the full day and your furnace is heating all that air and you're just blowing it outside. So I like to put a countdown timer. It means this thing's always turning itself off at a reasonable time. Some people like to put in humidity sensing switches. I've found that to be a problem certain months of the year in our climate. This thing will just run all the time because it's sensing humidity. There's also motion occupancy ones. I also don't like that because it's coming on when you're coming into the bathroom to brush your teeth and you don't necessarily need the vent fan on. So my preference is a countdown timer on these ventilation fans. So to start the electrical process, typically what I like to do is put the boxes in where I want them to be. So, you know, if you've got a receptacle or you got a double gang where you've got two different types of switches, you can get different sized boxes. So those get nailed in first, and then we'll start running the wire. And when you run the wire to it, you want to leave a little excess just in case you were wrong. You want to be able to unnail this and move it. So typically try and run all the wires either into the bottom or the top, then you can move the box around later if you screwed it up for some reason, which is pretty common. The wire you're going to run is typically Romex wire in most applications, especially residential applications. So these are basically the same thing. The different colors signifies the gauge of the wire. It's called 14 because this is a 14 gauge wire and this is a 12 gauge wire. So this is going to be a little bit more expensive, and it can also handle higher amperage. So this might be 15 amps, for example, where this might be 20 amps. So if you're running floor heat or a GFI that's capable of supporting a blow dryer, you might want to run this to a receptacle. But for your light circuit where it's just recessed lights and they're all LEDs, 14 gauge might be fine. So it's basically a cost-saving measure. You use a wire that's adequately sized for the load that's going to be on it. There are a lot of tools you need, but I'll go over sort of what I feel like are the essentials. The first one's going to be a tester. So if you put this to a wire that has current running through it, this is going to illuminate or make a sound. And the other one is going to be wire strippers. I like having a wire stripper like this because it'll not only cut a wire, but it'll also strip the jacket off a wire. This is a very old and worn set, but it'll pull the jacket off, and then you can always pull that back and then actually strip the conductor itself. You can, if you're connecting to an outlet, you can use that hole to bend it. So it's a tremendously useful tool, and they're reasonably priced. So these are sort of the essential tools in my mind that you would need to do some electrical work. So that's a look at some of the tools and equipment used for roughing in your own bathroom. Once again, I recommend hiring an electrician. It's going to be safer, more efficient. But if you want to do it yourself, hopefully you picked up some of the basics. Let's move on to mechanical. All right, so an important part of a bathroom remodel is installing the bathtub, right?
Right.
Because this is so common, I figured we'd just do this one right now. So I went with a fiberglass tub because it's obviously easier to carry up the stairs. You want to run me through some of the steps to get this thing installed?
So first things first, we'll set up a laser like we have here. Then we can install all of our ledgers. Once we have the ledgers all the way around, we can take the tub, dry fit it first, make sure everything's good. Come back out, we can mix up some mortar bed of some sort, throw it down. This is going to give us good support up under the tub so that we're not relying on the ledgers to hold the weight of it up.
Okay, and are we doing ledgers on just the back or on 3 sides?
3 sides. And then if, for your tub, it has like a little fold over face, but if you didn't have the finished apron, you're going to have a tileable face, then you would want to put a little pony wall in the front.
Got it.
After you install.
Okay, so because we have access behind and below, we're not going to put the plumbing on yet. We'll do that after. So for now, we'll just focus on getting these ledgers in. So let's do that.
Let's do it.
All right, I'm going to spread this around, and the purpose of this is basically to support the fiberglass, so when you're standing in the tub, you feel like you're standing on a nice solid surface. Doesn't feel like anything's flexing under you. So I'm sort of spreading this around, putting it where I think we need the most of it. Typically a tub is pitched, so I'm doing a little bit more at the back. And we'll set the tub into it and see how we did. Okay, the tub's installed. We've got screws around the perimeter, and it's sitting in a bed of that mortar. So the next thing we want to do is give this tub a quick wipe down, see if there's any damage we can't get out. And then we're going to apply some masking tape just to prevent the high level damage areas, which are typically like this leading edge or this corner. If someone puts some plywood on here, get those little particulates. So we're just going to apply some masking tape quickly just to protect it for now. So then we can set some maybe rigid foam on top and protect the top of the tub. So let's do that. Maybe a nice. So we installed the ledger on the wall. We mixed up some mortar, put it on the floor, squished the tub into it, made sure it was level, shimmed as necessary, added some screws and washers to hold it in, and connect the plumbing assembly. So next we're gonna let that set up and move on to the mechanicals. So every bathroom has mechanicals. Typically it has a heating source, maybe a cooling source, and a bathroom vent fan. So the vent fan will show you just typically sucks air out, it's electric, and blows it outside. But for heating and cooling, a lot of times you need to modify the system you have to make it work with your bathroom. Sometimes you want to maximize storage like we did in this bathroom, basically make this a 4-piece bathroom, and that meant moving the old steam radiator. We actually had one under this window previously. It was a little bit larger, but because we're adding insulation and we're adding radiant floor heat that's electric to the floor, we're gonna size down and reuse this one from elsewhere on the job. So you can see I've added a header above that's gonna support the load, and then we're gonna have our plumber connect in that. Now, modifying a steam radiator is really not a do-it-yourself project because it takes a lot of understanding on how steam systems work. If you have a hot water radiator or baseboard radiator, that might be something you are able to do yourself. And if you have a forced air system that's fed by rigid or flexible ductwork, typically it's simple enough to move those things around yourself. So it depends what type of mechanical system you have, but my recommendation is if you have big old cast iron radiators, you hire a professional to deal with that. If you have flexible ductwork and it's relatively minor, you could probably handle that yourself. Okay, so let's review what we went over today. We started with the plumbing, learned about the necessary products that are available, tools, talked about the necessity of using a plumber, but if you decide not to use a plumber, some of the things to look out for. We talked about the electrical systems, some of the pointers there, where receptacles could go, where lights could go, some of the tools you would use for that. And then we talked about mechanical, getting ventilation out of the space, getting our steam radiator moved, and all of the details that could be involved with that. So there's a lot of pieces in MEP to go over. We also got this beautiful bathtub installed. We got our OD overflow or trip lever assembly installed. So a lot of great stuff. A big thank you to our sponsor today, OD. You pretty much have to use their products. They're so good for bathroom remodels, and they make all types of things from J-hooks to support the pipe to the shower drains themselves. Fantastic company, and I've been using them exclusively in my bathrooms for many, many years. So next time we're going to move on to waterproofing, prepping the floor, and doing some leveling. So I'm looking forward to showing that and showing you what all of the plumbing and electrical looks like wrapped up. See you next time on Let's Renovate a Bathroom, only on The Build Show.